Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third IEA webinar. This time the topic is professional certification and IEA endorsement. It's a little bit of a diversion from the scientific content that we will generally be offering, but various people have suggested that this would be useful, particularly for the members of the IEA federated societies who are interested in certification, but are a little confused with the system. So we're going to have this webinar, which will be recorded and placed on YouTube following the presentation. I'd like to assure you that apart from the presenters, the participants cannot be seen. So you do not need to fear that you'll be published in any uncompromising positions. The first thing I'd like to do is to present quickly present the people who will be participating in this webinar. My name is Maggie. I have been certified for about 20 years as a European ergonomist, and until recently I worked as the chair of the IEA certification subcommittee. I'm now the vice president of the IEA and secretary general, and assisting me as co-chair is Carol Stewart-Buttle from the BCPE, the certification body in the USA, and Marion Edwin from New Zealand, who since the last few months has taken over the role of being the chair of the certification subcommittee for the IEA. She's going to today be talking about New Zealand experiences. Bernard Duguay, who is also a EURERG, is the president of the European certification body. Andrew Thatcher is the president of the Ergonomics, also the certification board of South Africa, and Marcio Marçal is representing CISCB, the certification system of Brazil. Now, the first thing I'd like to explain is that if you want to ask questions, please ask them in the Q&A. If you can, we will try and respond as we go along, but we will have a question time during the, we'll have a break between speakers to answer the questions that have come in if they haven't already been answered. And at the end, we will do the same thing of the 1.5 hours. Now, starting off with my presentation, I would like to explain the difference between what the IEA does, which is endorsement, and what the certification bodies do. The certification bodies certify people. The IEA certifies or endorses systems. So currently, there are 7 certification systems that have been endorsed by the IEA. They're not all represented tonight. We wouldn't have had time, but you can read them here. The Australian Ergonomic Society, Brazil, is represented. The BCPE represented. Canada is our newest body that has become endorsed this year. CRE from Europe, I'll come back to that in a moment. Japan and New Zealand. Now, CRE is a special case because it ties up far more certification bodies than I could list on this slide. There are, I think, about 20 countries represented in CRE. Some of them are banded together, like you'll see here. The Nordic Ergonomic Society represents several ergonomic societies, but Bernard will explain in his talk a little bit more about how that system works. The reason that we do it this way in the IEA is because each region needs to develop their own systems that suit their own needs and their own cultural systems. So that, as you will find out in the next hour and a half, there is quite a bit of variety between how the certification bodies work. I will go on to explain later on in the presentation today what makes them all, what qualifies them to be IEA endorsed. But at the moment, you just have to understand that there are a lot of different ones and they are tied together through the IEA by this endorsement system. So I guess the first thing that we should really talk about is what is the value of certification anyway? Why should you get certified? There are actually quite a lot of reasons, but I've written down ones here that I think many people have in common. And the most common reason we hear is for job opportunities. You need to sort yourselves out from all the people who profess to be specialists one way or another in our field, but lack the qualifications, the education, and the experience that certified people have. So it's a way of proving to potential employers that you are a qualified professional in this field. It gives credibility and esteem to you. It's a professional system, like doctors, engineers, other professions. We are all peer reviewed and recognized amongst each other. It gives you a great deal of personal satisfaction. Getting certified is proof of your professional competence and your standing with your peers. And from our point of view, from the IEA's point of view, I mean, it shows your commitment to the profession. It shows that you are an ergonomist, a HFE professional, whatever you want to call yourself or what you're called locally. The names vary a lot. But I think that sort of sums up the main reasons for why people become certified. I'd like to now to hand over to Carol Stewart-Buttle, who will explain to us how the system works in the USA. Carol?
I'm just going to share my screen, and that is coming up. And here we are. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Whoops. Here's the beginning. So I am the executive director, as Maggie has just handed over to me. And I'm going to talk about the BCPE system of certification in the USA. Let me just move this bar, which seems to be in the way. So brief history. BCP was founded in 1990 as a nonprofit. It seems so long ago now. Initially, there was a portfolio review. That is the most common one that the certification bodies around the world are doing. And in 1994, an exam was developed that was a 3-part, and it was paper and pencil exam. That ran for a considerable length of time. But in 2014, we went electronic. And we have a 1-part multiple choice that's electronically offered internationally at proctored sites. Proctored sites are preferred for certification bodies. And I say this preferred is because it's, the certification bodies run on an ISO standard, which Maggie will be talking more about, that the IEA uses to endorse us as well. So we used proctored sites, but with COVID, online proctored is also offered as sites closed during COVID times. There's 1,100 sites in 120 countries that we can offer our exam as it's needed. We cannot put on any courses. But so again, based on the ISO standard and the accreditation bodies in this country that follow the same standard, that's ISO standard 17024, you have to keep an arm's distance from any kind of courses, including preparation courses. It's considered a conflict of interest. BCP process also is conducted only in English. So BCPE provides one comprehensive professional certification in human factors, ergonomics, user experience with a choice of designation. In the USA, there are three main terms used in different work domains. Human factors, that was coined in the United States, is being well entrenched since the beginnings of human factors here, mostly in military systems and major process systems. But ergonomics is well established as a term as well. And that is often considered and thought of as a term in occupational ergonomics. And user experience also has come up. As we all know, it's a term that is broad and evolving, and it's often with user experience research. So BCPE defines these terms as interchangeable, but there is a desire to use specific terms in certain domains. And unfortunately, it's not, I'm not saying this is a model to follow. This is what we have to live with and struggle with, as it's not very, it's not accepted essentially by accreditation bodies in the States. At least they have trouble with us doing this. So I'm going to talk about the candidates and what it takes to get certified in our system. There are three parts to it: in education, experience, and which is including showing work examples. So that's very close to a portfolio process. And then there's the exam. If you have education only, like a student coming out of school and from a program of human factors, you don't necessarily have the experience and work examples. And so there is an associate offered for each of those designations that is temporary, can be held for up to 6 years, and you're expected to attain full certification during that time. It's popular with students. They feel that it has given them an edge to get a job. The exam is the core competencies, and it's the base of the whole certification process, plus the exam process. It covers the breadth of the field. The exam tests the core knowledge and of a young professional at 3 years. That's because we define the amount of experience needed as a minimum of 3 years. And therefore it's the knowledge is across the competencies, and therefore it's not a deep domain knowledge in the same way that it might be with other systems. So the exam is covering that breadth and really testing that you know what you don't know, enough to know to go and get a colleague and that you identify a problem and a colleague can be called in. We have also education. So in a bit more detail, I'll put these three aspects with focus on the exam. So more quickly, with education, we have a minimum of a bachelor's degree. However, we've always had plus 24 relevant semester credits, and now 24 relevant credits in education is essentially a master's degree in the States. That's 24 to 36 credits. So we took off a number of years ago the requirement of an actual master's degree, because essentially it was to provide that flexibility for a multidisciplinary field to come in to collect the equivalent of a master's degree that would serve in the human factors community. But they do need a bachelor's degree that can be in any subject. The minimum credits, there are minimum credits also in our education in 5 sections. And those 5 sections are basic principles, as you can see, systems design, core background, which is your anatomy, physiology types of topics, core methodology, which you see here is statistics, process analysis, design methods, usability, application section, which is of analysis, design, validation, implementation, and that is the interaction of the human with machine, environment, software, job, organization, and professional issues. So that would be completed the education. Then it comes to be demonstrating your experience. So minimum of 3 years full-time equivalent, which means you can be part-time and acquire this. And if you have a doctorate in human factors, then you only need 2 years. Work samples are not to prove that you've worked, but to demonstrate knowledge and skills. So this 3-part application or a 3-part effort to get certified is to try and have people show their strengths in different ways. So demonstrating your knowledge and skill, what's required are 2 examples of each: analysis, design, and integration, implementation and validation. The application is blind reviewed by 2 reviewers, and on acceptance, you sit for the exam. So the process behind this is very similar to portfolios, you can imagine. It takes an army of people and a lot of volunteers. The exam itself is 3 hours, 125 questions, multiple choice across core competencies. Proctored sites, as I mentioned, including proctored online, offered twice a year, and it tests the baseline of competence across the field. Now, the heart of the exam then is an exam specification, which is the knowledge and skills of the validated core competencies, which, by the way, is similar to the IEA core competencies. And so the knowledge and skills is what writers write questions to. The exam has to be balanced based on competency weighting by the job, what's called a job task analysis here, which is the method of validating the core competencies. So each task competency is scored by frequency and criticality in a survey, and that happens on a frequent basis. Each exam contains unscored questions being validated, which is how we build our data bank. And those number of unscored can change. So all results are provided as scaled scores from 200 to 500. So they're relatable to the other exams. There's an adjustment each time. Each exam is psychometrically analyzed and checked for consistency with previous exams, whether there's any problems with the questions, and to validate the unscored questions. Exam maintenance is an ongoing process to ensure up-to-date and fresh, that it's up-to-date and fresh, and it requires an enormous amount of documentation if you're considering taking this on. With the exam specification, which is based on core competencies, is every 5 to 7 years, there has to be a review and a job task analysis. And pretty much on the same, if there's a major change to competencies, we need to have a setting of the passing score. And that also requires subject matter experts and another bank of volunteers. This is quite a process to be doing. 5 to 7 might sound a long time in years, but as soon as you've finished one, you're beginning the next. So there's some other support activities which appear very constant when you're doing this is call for question writers, which is twice a year, but those questions then need review and editing, efficient archiving of those questions and the authors and sources so that there can be They can be stood behind if there's any questions, tracking the questions and frequency of use. So we almost need a serious database for this. And that takes a considerable amount of time of the exam committee or an expanded group of volunteers. Security of the exam is paramount and looked at very closely by detailed accreditation bodies in this country. And we need to make sure the reference list reflects the question sources or most of the sources of most of the questions. And also that we have some sample questions which we need to keep fresh. So this is a great undertaking. But on my final slide here, it's often the exam has its challenges, but if it's carefully developed and you can really get a group of committed volunteers, it is an objective assessment that is looked for maybe certainly more in the States because it is a litigious defense. As we might know, the legal community is pretty involved in this culture. So that's where the exam is today. And we continue to shape and continuous improvement on every front. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. Okay, our next speaker is Marion Edwin from New Zealand. Marion, over to you.
Lovely, thank you. Just share my screen as well. Right, good morning to you all from New Zealand. So I'm going to talk with you about a certification scheme that we've had running here in New Zealand now for it's over 20 years. It hasn't been endorsed by the IEA for all of that time, but we have had it up and running. So unlike the program we've just heard from the BCP in the US, ours is a much, much smaller system. So it will look a little different in size and shape. We'll move, we'll be happy. Right, so New Zealand Ergonomic Society started in 1986. We were part of the Australian and New Zealand Ergonomic Society before that for 20 years. And then we became the HFESNZ just in 2012, so more recently. We've got very small membership. So we think that 110 is actually quite a lot because we've increased over the last 5 years. And we have a mere 23 professional members as of last week. And again, you might think that's tiny, but that's increased 64% in the last 5 years. So we really are talking a tiny professional group, but we need it to grow. And I won't just say want, we need it to grow. We have been a federated member of the IEA since '91. And our system is based on CRE. So Maggie mentioned that CRE is a big conglomerate of different association of countries and associations. So we based ours on CRE when it began in the late 1990s. And we've had our system now endorsed twice by the IEA. And I'm just going to talk briefly about something that's been really important for New Zealand and for our human factors and ergonomics practice in New Zealand. And it was the very unfortunate Pike River mine disaster that killed 29 men in 2010. And that in New Zealand had sort of deep and far-reaching impact on the health and safety system. It led to, there was a task force that was completed after that disaster, and there was a new Health and Safety at Work Act that came in 2016, and there was a number of pieces of work that sort of were related to that. The primary finding of the review was that there was a major capacity and capability constraint among health and safety practitioners and in the regulator that contributed significantly to New Zealand's poor workplace health and safety records. So we have not been doing well in terms of our overall health and safety performance. One of the other findings of the task force review that occurred was that there was a real lack of expertise and poor standards amongst the various health and safety disciplines. And we've counted ourselves as one of those disciplines with the full knowledge that not all ergonomists or human factors professionals would consider that they work in health and safety. However, we've taken the opportunity to grow as a result of this interest in health and safety, and in fact it is beginning to make a real impact on the demand for human factors and ergonomics in New Zealand, which is great and highly necessary at this moment in time. So we still have a need for a human factors and education program. We've had with such low numbers, you can imagine there's low demand for some of the more specific educational requirements that we have for human factors and ergonomics. Right now, though, we also have a government-funded workforce development program that's underway to increase the numbers of human factors and ergonomics professionals. So that's alongside health and safety generalists and occupational hygienists as well, and another couple of groups too. So there's some recognised need for really improving the standards and skill base and just the numbers of expertise, people with this sort of expertise in our country. So it's been a real time of change over the last few years, and it's continuing apace right now. So our Human Factors and Ergonomics Society completely runs with a voluntary committee and a voluntary professional affairs board, and I think the volunteer part is true even for the big associations and professional certification processes. So ours is no different. It's all run purely voluntarily. And we have a system where the Professional Affairs Board is essentially a subcommittee of the broader Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, and professional members are part of an important group within the society, but not the only group. We are guided by the society rules about the membership categories and a Professional Affairs Board manual, so we have sort of a double system. And we've kept it simple because we are tiny. So we've recently added the technical professional membership, which has been modelled actually on the CIEHF sort of approach, because we felt that worked and fitted our needs here in New Zealand. And we have an associate membership, which is, and that sounded similar to the wording that BCPE used for theirs as well, where those people have completed education and a supervised training component for human factors and ergonomics, and our certified members have 2 years of professional practice following their human factors and ergonomics education and supervised training. We also require our professional members, as is necessary, to be recertified, and that's been a 3-yearly process. We're currently working on changing that so that all professional members are completing annual continuing professional development activities instead of just that 3-yearly recertification for those who are certified. So this shows you the overall framework and the flow of how our members come in and what you need to have achieved. So you'll see that for the certified person, you need to have 3 years of relevant sort of a building block education, followed by the supervised training is usually built in. So that might be a professional practice paper or a supervised project with other ergonomists working with you and supervising the nature of your work. There has also been another way to become certified, and it was essentially by review of a huge portfolio of work, really, that was peer-reviewed, published papers, essentially. So allowed some people, perhaps with a really strong academic career and a large body of work that covered a breadth of application, the opportunity to become certified. But we will not say it was an easy option. And we're not yet sure whether that needs to continue or whether with an improved education program, we'll be able to actually just really stick with the the education and supervised training route to come through. So I won't go into all of the detail. It will probably sound quite similar to some other systems. And the notion of having a portfolio of work that is submitted with good evidence of the nature of your work and peer-reviewed papers and reports and all of those sorts of things being a very important part of the process. Again, we know that it's not an easy application to fill out and complete. It's a simple Word document that you have to attach a lot of detail and data to. But there's a lot of thought and effort that needs to go into the process. And one of the things that people say is, oh my Lord, it was difficult. And it's a lengthy process and we need to support our people through. We've now also added to the support for newcomers. We now have a mentoring program that is a formalised mentoring program just in the last few weeks that has started as a result of our workforce development program work that is underway. So there's quite a period of growth and development and real interest and requirement for more ergonomists to be available. And that's been demonstrated. My new role is with our health and safety regulator in New Zealand, but only in the last year and a bit have they even begun to employ in a really organised and specific way more human factors professionals and ergonomists. And just several weeks ago we had our first meeting, and there's now 9 of us in 2 different groups within the organisation. And for New Zealand, that's significant. So, and it would not have occurred without the real efforts of that workforce development program that's occurred and consequent to the loss of life at Pike River. And so it's interesting how those things can hugely impact in smaller countries particularly. So I think I've just talked through those completely without the slide. So Word document, assemble the application, lots of coaching and support from others. The application is submitted and reviewed by the board of 3 assessors. They make a decision on, sometimes it'll be more information is required, and then the certification is given if they've met the required standards. So the other thing that's occurred with the post Pike River disaster changes is that we now have an association called HESEN, the Health and Safety Association of New Zealand. I've just realised I've gone over time. And this requires many of the disciplines to also register as part of this additional separate body. So that's, and they then publish a register of the occupational hygienists, occupational health nurses, the range of disciplines who work in the health and safety sector. So that's added more demand and clarity about who the professionals are that should be being used to meet the needs of businesses. There's a number of, I'll just leave that slide for just a moment. So there's a number of resources and places you can go for some more information about our program, and we'd be happy to assist the thinking of any other smaller societies that would be perhaps interested in going through this process. I'll stop sharing you now.
Thank you very much, Marion. So I think that with those 2 presentations, we went from the biggest certification body that is a member of the endorsed by the IEA to the smallest. But I think you have shown us very well that even if you're small, you can do it and very professionally. So thanks very much, Marion. Our next presenter will be Marcio Marçal, who will talk about the Brazilian system, which is a slightly different system to the others, but Marcio will explain the differences when he's with his presentation.
Okay, here we go. First, I want to say thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, to have this time. And sorry about that. sorry about that. It's my dog. Okay. Anyway, but it's happened when we are home. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the Brazil Ergonomic Certification System. I'm a member of the Board of Certification and also a member of the Brazilian Ergonomic Association. And I'm going to explain a little bit how it works here in Brazil. The certification process in Brazil began in 2002 with the creation of the Brazil Ergonomic Certification System. Initially, we have 2 ways in this period to become a certified. One is for beginners or people who just start and don't have experience in ergonomics. And then it's required for these persons to take a national certification exam. I'm going to talk a little bit about this later. And for the others ergonomic that is already in activity and working and are interested in become certified, the CSEB decide to give 4 years for these people in the transition process. This transition process is the people who want to take the certification can apply instead of to take the national certification examination. They need to build a report and all the documentation that show that he really work and have experience in ergonomic in the last 5 years. That's what I did, and present to CSEB. And if it's proved that he's really working in ergonomic and have a knowledge in practical field, we receive a certification system without necessary to take an exam. And after 206, this period of transition, everybody who want to take a certification process, it's necessary to take the exam. Only one situation is not necessary. I'm going to talk later. And of course, to organize all these processes of certification was necessary to create a certification standards. Some rules or some standards that is necessary in all areas of formation and competencies and courses that we can give some guidelines for the people who want to be certified, what's necessary, the minimal requirement, and it's impossible to build something without some standards and rules that we can really show the ergonomists how he can prepare or he can be able to be certified. I'm gonna try using this chart to explain how it's worked today, the certification process in Brazil. The question is, who can apply for be certified? The first one is the people who work with ergonomics or students or who are interested in ergonomics, and he can take a course that 306 hours minimal on contents only about ergonomics area. This course need to be accredited by the CSEB. Why was necessary to do that? Because we have different types of courses and people selling courses, and the business also involved in the course. And it's the big challenge for us, and I think it's for all of our colleagues, is the different backgrounds of formation. We have physicians, we have physical therapists, we have engineers, we have design, and so on. And each one come with his own background. And the ergonomics is become one part of this. And it was necessary for the CSEB to set up some standards, like what is minimum required of knowledge of ergonomics to be eligible to take the National Ergonomic Certification. And then the course can apply to be accredited by the CSEB. And if you do that, the CSEB send one of the members of the committee, the board, to make a visit, make an interview, look how is structured, the course, look all the documentation, like who is the professors, if the professor have experience in ergonomics to be teaching, and if everything is okay, the course is accredited by the CSEB. Okay, that's one way to be certified today is you take the course and you are able to take the National Ergonomic Certification exam. The other one is if you're a student of master degree or finish, you're a master or doctor in ergonomics, but this is another required because in Brazil it's necessary for us that the the program of master and doctor must be recognized by the Brazilian government. Because if it is way, we know that it's attend the requirements from the formation of the professional. And then if the thesis or the dissertation is in the ergonomic area, these masters and this doctor also are eligible to take the National Ergonomic Certification exam. The last one is for researchers and professors in programs of master or doctor in ergonomics, or even researchers who really have experience in ergonomics. This also can apply to be certified. It's necessary for them to build a dossier or a report of all documentations of experience of the last 5 years. If they have master degree students, PhD students, if the area is really in the ergonomic field, and if the CSEB do the analysis and it's be okay, of course, he's gonna be certified. In this case, also, it's not necessary for the professor to take the exam. Since he is a professor, he's a researcher in the area, he is automatically certified. Okay. The National Ergonomic Certification today is divided in 2 parts. One is a multiple choice question, is a 2.5 hour of exam. We offer some twice in the year. And this exam, you have a multiple choice and others, we say closed, not open. In another part, is the other half is the most important, is the open questions. In this open question, is the candidate is the moment the candidate can show what he really know about ergonomics. Normally are questions that it's necessary for them to be experienced, to be in the field, to be has a practical experience in ergonomics. And in this moment is the moment that he can show for in the board examination, he really deserves to be certified because he has a knowledge to be there. And normally these open questions are more weighted in the distribution of the points on the score. And if the candidate have approved, he's automatically received the certification of the board. The certification are divided in 4 levels. The first one is the beginning for everyone. Is only the difference is only for the researchers and the professors. Is the level 3, where in this level the certification is for 3 years. After these 3 years, he needed to reapply. It's not necessary to take the exam, but he needs to present a dossier and a report and all the documentation that in these 3 years, he really worked with ergonomics. He really just practicing and developing the ergonomic field. And so on. If everything's okay, he go to the level 2 and more 3 years, and then more 3 years, level 1, and the last one is the senior level. The senior level, we can stay for 5 years, and after 5 years, you need to renew. You need to renew the certification. You don't need to take the exam, but you need to get the report and the dossier showing that in these 5 years you really are working for ergonomics. And if it's okay, he just renewed and received the certification. If the people sometimes are not interested anymore, and for example, don't renew or stay for 3 years without renew, if he decide to come back, he can reapply for the certification, but in this case, he needs to take the National Ergonomic Certification again. And that's the way that we now organize all the process of the certification. Now we are in the phase that all the exams that we already done, we are making the evaluation of this exam. What is the strong parts of the formation, what is the weak part, what is necessary to change, what's necessary to change in the exam, and also what is necessary to give the feedback for the course. Because it's necessary to, the courses also, they have a period like 3 years to renew. And then if there is no approval, if the students are not passing the exam, the course is not, the credit of the course is not renewed. And then it's necessary for the CSEB also to give a feedback for the students, and good feedback for the courses and the master degree program. What is necessary to improve? Where is the weak part of the formation that the people have difficulties during the exam? Today, now we are endorsed in IEA for the International Economic Association in 2020. Yeah, just start. It's a challenge for us. Today we have 248 certified ergonomists. We are really happy with these numbers because actually there is no law, nothing that if you have certified ergonomist that you're gonna get a job. And this is, it's a lot of work from the Brazilian Ergonomic Association and of CSEB to motivate and to try to get more and more people become a certified ergonomist. Now we have the level 3, the entrance level, 90, level 2, 54, 91, 36, seniors, 69. Today we have only 8 courses that are accredited, and we have 3 more courses that apply, and we are in process of accreditation. That's another part that we are starting to work more to get more courses that can be accredited and certified. That's It's just one brief for the how it's work in Brazil. We are improving, we are learning. This webinar is very important for us that we can learn with our friends or our others associated. And I'm very happy and gonna be open for the questions and the discussion later. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you very much, Marcio. I think that's a very nice example of working very closely with universities on getting the certification system established. Bernard Duguay will be our next speaker from the CRE. Can I hand over to you, Bernard, if you're ready?
Yes, I am. Is it working well?
Perfectly.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Bernard Duguay, the current president of CRE. And in this presentation, I want to put the emphasis on our process, and you can, of course, have more details on the CRE requirement on our website.
Bernard, if I can interrupt briefly, I think that you aren't in presentation mode. Sorry.
Sorry?
The mode of your presentation is a little strange.
Okay, I can try again.
That's better. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Just. Yeah. So CRE was founded more or less 30 years ago by 6, then quickly 9 countries in Europe. And the members of CRE are the national bodies. Some national bodies are part of the national society, and other national bodies are independent from the national society. Now there are 14 member organizations covering around 20 countries in Europe. And every 6 months, we have a meeting of the CRE Council with a representative from each country, from each national assessment board, and with the CRE board members. And now the European ergonomists are around 500 in Europe, with rather big difference between the countries. There are 2 main, like I think everywhere in the certification system, there are 2 main areas of requirement. Academic education for at least more or less at the master level, with 1 year specifically in ergonomics, and at least 3 years of professional experience. It can be 3 years of independent experience, or only 2 years plus 1 year of supervised training by an experienced ergonomist. And the certification is for 5 years, and then after that we have to renew more or less like the Brazilian system we could see before. So I want to explain the process between countries and and CRE. So each national assessment board have to the candidate at the national level has to fill a form, a full form, made by the country, by the national board. And the candidate must give evidence on training, of course, and evidence on practice. We don't have any exam, but the candidate must give logbooks, write stories of ergonomics intervention, or research, or reports, or scientific articles, or whatever. But he must prove an actual practice in ergonomics. And the candidate must also give references, other URLs or professors, or any references needed. And after the meeting of the National Assessment Board, where there is an assessment of the candidate, and the candidate can be accepted or rejected, and the accepted candidates are presented to the CRI through a summary form, which is on our website. This is, of course, a summary form, so it's shorter than the full national form, and the summary form is on the main items of the certification requirement, so education, training, practice, and professional development, involvement in ergonomic events, live, ergonomics live, and so on. But the national board must show how the NAB is making the decision about each candidate. So on our form, there are rather a lot of comment boxes where the national representative, who will later on attend the CRI Council meeting, must explain why they made the decision, and especially if the candidate doesn't fulfill completely all the requirements, but the national body want to accept him as a URL and after, with those summary form, there is a validation at the CRI Council level in our meeting every 6 months. So the CRI Council is not really reassessing the candidate because we don't have the full form, but is checking the process of the assessment and the decision making through the summary form. And during the council meeting, the national representative has to explain and to answer questions, and sometimes the candidate can be not accepted by CRI, so the application is postponed and we wait for more information, or not often at all, but we can refuse a candidate asking for more experience or more education in ergonomics. So that our process dealing with a very big diversity through Europe, diversity of educational system, of practice, of employment for ergonomists. And one of the challenges to assess education, because there are countries with masters in ergonomics and a lot of now countries without any master in ergonomics. So when in the country there are master degree in ergonomics, it's rather easy to assess, we could say, because we have to check all the core competencies required by CRE, which are very close with to the IEA competencies, are really in the master degree. That's the number of item and of core competencies from A to K we require to the candidate. You can see that on the CRE website. It was not my main topic today, and the request from Maggie to explain all the requirements. The problem is when there is no master degree in ergonomics in the country, so there is a diploma, the red square, and so we first check what was in that diploma, in that education, but then the candidates must find the other educational request in other kind of education places. It can be at the university or in different school, engineering school, and so on. So it's more difficult to assess at the national level, but it's also sometimes rather difficult to explain at the career level. So we, I could say, like IEA, in fact, we have to deal with a lot of diversity, but we have to deal with, but to promote also the diversity. And sometimes there is a tension between what we want to have in common for certification and the situation of education and practice in each country. And we really want to allow all ergonomists to apply to the title, whatever the background, because in some country, the background is more oriented in engineering school, or in psychology, or in physiology. It depends on the structure of the education system in the country, and also the mode of professional practice are very different. And it's also more challenging. It was the question at the beginning to promote the ergonomists, to promote ergonomics, and to promote the title. And it's the diversity, it's also more challenging for us to promote the title and explain the benefit. And there is another issue that we, of course, the needs between the very small society and the larger society are not exactly the same, and CRE has to deal with this diversity, supporting the small society to help them to increase the number of certified ergonomists. And also CRE is not working alone, and we have a lot of connection with the bodies in Europe, like the European Federation of Ergonomic Society, of course, the National Society, and there are also a lot of specific association, professional association of ergonomists, and we are also working with those associations. Thank you. I try to stay on time, and you can have a visit on our website to have more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. We have a little bit of time now, well, not terribly long, unfortunately, but if anybody wants to raise any questions that haven't already been put into the Q&A, I just had a quick look through them, and there has been a number of people asking questions about setting up societies and that's very nice to see that there are people interested in doing that in countries where there are not well-established societies. If you go onto the IEA website, you can find which countries are members of the IEA or have members of the IEA. And of course, if there's already a society set up in your area, the best thing to do is to contact them. If you're wanting to set up a society in a particular country, the IEA is very happy to help you do that. It's probably not the best thing to start with a certification system. You do need to have society members who work out the rules for your own country. But if you contact the area organizations that are all networked in the IEA, particularly Bernard talked about the FEES, the Federation of European Ergonomic Society. In Africa, there's Andrew would be able to direct you to the Federation of Ergonomics Societies in Africa's Ergo Africa. And in South America, there is ULA Ergo, which networks the societies within South America. There are other organizations in Asia that perform the same function there. We don't have too many representatives from Asia with us today because it's not a good time for them, I think. Marion, thank you for getting up so early in the morning to be with us. Now, if there's, I don't think, yeah, there's 3 more open questions I can see. What is the name of the master or doctorate? That's a question for you, Marcio. Perhaps you can type the answer to that. I think might be the easiest. Is there a benefit to having multiple certification? I'm going to talk to you about this in just a minute. There's a few other questions that I will answer in the second half of my presentation, which I will get to very soon. But the answer is specifically here with the BCPE and the European ergonomists, they do mutual, well, they recognize each other, but the BCPE, because of their local ISO certification, have a little bit of trouble with that. I suggest that you should contact Carol about more details. However, I know that the CRE will recognize qualifications from all of the other IEA endorsed systems, and I think most of them will do that. You may have to demonstrate that you are that you know the local rules, that you can't just sort of come from one country and work in another country if you don't know the laws and systems in that country. So that might be a requirement. Does anybody else in the panel want to add any comment to that about mutual recognition? Marianne?
Just to make the comment that I think for us, we don't not recognise other endorsed societies particularly, but we do have a growing recognition that we require ergonomists in New Zealand to have really good understanding of te tiriti or waitangi, which is a legal agreement between our native people and the rest of New Zealanders that places cultural issues really highly, and we must work in partnership with our Māori people, and really important actually for the work that we do, because many of the populations we need to make a difference for injury and things are those native people that are being impacted more. So we've created some elements to our certification that says that we really want practicing ergonomists and human factors professionals in New Zealand to have really good cultural awareness. So we ask that people have done some work around learning what that means in New Zealand, so that we are better able to address the needs of Pacifica and Māori particularly. So that's a sort of a unique local requirement.
I could speak to about BCPE in that we wanted to have reciprocity, but our challenge is having to prove that there's equivalency to our exam, which is what is held up as being the ultimate aspects of accreditation by the accreditation bodies here. So we're working on it, but
work in progress. Thanks, Carol. So I think I might proceed on with my presentation, which is about the endorsement criteria. There's some of that will answer some of the other questions that are still outstanding. I'll put my screen back up. Now I've got the problem again. Right, you can see on my slide here that there are two elements to getting endorsement of a certification system. The IEA bases the endorsement criteria on this ISO standard that Carol mentioned earlier, the ISO IEC 17024, which was revised in 2012. It's called Conformity Assessment, General Requirements for Bodies Operating Certification of Persons, and of course is exactly what these organizations are doing. Now, the IEA first endorsed the criteria based on that document in 2001, and the rules have been largely unchanged since then. What has changed is that we have revised the core competencies. The core competencies are the list of things, of knowledge areas and skills that an ergonomist needs to have for professional certification. And those were revised very recently, basically because of recommendations that had been made in a strategy paper on the future of the profession. The world of work, the world of human factors and ergonomics has changed quite substantially over the last 20 years, as you could imagine. And it was necessary to bring those competencies into line with the changes in the world where HFE professionals are working. You will find a link to that document on the IEA website. You can see the address there. The main thing that I would like to emphasize here is that has to do with the ISO standard. This is, I think people are very interested in what is in the core competencies, but in actual fact, it's much more important from our point of view to be able to show us that the certification body has good governance. That is, that the people who are assessing the candidates are doing so from a standpoint of being very qualified themselves, that they are doing it in an unbiased way. But there's also the rule that if they refuse a candidate, there has to be some sort of system that people can appeal that will be taken seriously if they feel that they've been unfairly treated. This is all general rules about how to run a good certification body that have to be met. Now, we've briefly discussed the issue of mutual recognition between the different certification bodies. I think that it's always best to get certified in the area that you are working in. I don't think there's much point in having multiple certification systems unless you're jumping from continent to continent or country to country. So perhaps that answers, I hope that answers the question that was raised before. I'd like, before I go on with the wrap up, to hand over now to Andrew, our last speaker. And Andrew is going to give us some of his experiences, because he has got an application in at the moment for IEA endorsement that is being processed. And perhaps he'd like, I asked him, would he like to share some of the experiences of putting all those documents together and applying for endorsement? Andrew?
Thanks very much, Maggie. I see I'm coming right at the end, so thank you very much for everyone who's stayed on. Maggie asked me, as she said, just to talk a little bit about the process of getting endorsed. And in that process, I'm also going to talk a little bit about what it means to put together a program, because we've done one fairly recently. So my first slide just talks about what it takes to put together a certification system. It isn't something that just happened overnight. Where we are now, we started about 11 years ago with the Ergonomic Society setting up a committee to develop a certification system. And 4 years later, they had a certification system that was put in place that was sent to the society to be approved. Our next, I suppose, difficulty then came when we had a certification system, but we had no one to certify people. And this sort of becomes a bit of a paradox. You have a certification system, but no one's certified to certify other people. It's a bit of a chicken and egg type scenario. So we, at the time, approached CRE, and in 2016, they approved we had 4 applications that went through the CRE process, and CRE approved those 4 people. And 3 out of those 4 people then formed the core of our professional affairs board, and they then started approving applications directly then. And then, so in 2017, the first professionals were certified by the PAB within South Africa. Similarly to what you saw when Carol was talking, we also found that there were a number of situations where people had the educational qualifications, but hadn't yet had the experience. And similarly to the US situation, we found that many of these were students or people who had recently finished degrees that were struggling to find work without, and they needed the certification. So we introduced in our system, it's not called associate, it's called in training designation. And at the same time, we also approved our continuing professional development documentation. And then last year, we approved our recertification process, realizing that we were just about to start needing to go through, after 5 years, to recertify people. And this year, just about to go through our first recertification process. Like Marion, we're really small, so we only have 14 people certified, full certified professional ergonomists, another 6 which are associates, and then another 6 people who are in training, but it's growing quickly now. So we may, for example, at the end of November, add about 1/3. And we have 2 different certification times during the year. So in a year's time, we might actually have doubled those numbers. So we're kind of at a stage now where it is doubling. Where it comes from, and there was a question about this earlier, so I said I would answer it live. There are guidelines available on the IEA website, and we use those in putting them together, about the IEA core competencies, as well as guidelines about standards for accreditation of educational programs, what should be in an educational program, the types of knowledge which one needs. And we also use various other types of publications which are out there, including the rules and documentations from the other IEA-endorsed certification bodies. And they've been really great, or they were when we were putting our system together, at sharing their information with us. So if you're looking at putting a certification system together, look at the other bodies who already have them to see how they might help you. I go through this really quickly because you've seen this kind of before, but as I hinted earlier, we've actually got two different levels of an ergonomics associate and a certified professional ergonomist. The certified professional ergonomist is roughly equivalent to what you'll see at CRE and at the BCPE. So they are very, very similar, but in our particular national setup, we also require to have something that leads into that. And so that's why we have something called a certified ergonomics associate, who can do a limited amount of the ergonomics work, but must also recognize when things fall outside of their scope, so they can refer it to someone who's a fully certified professional ergonomist. And we have guidelines about what it is they might or might not be able to do. We've also set very clearly what the educational levels as well as their professional practice levels will be. This is somewhat more than what you would find in CRE or the BCPE. And part of that, of course, is that we need to have sufficient time to be able to evaluate their actual practice behavior. And that's because we're not yet in a position, because we're very small, to have an exam. Just listening to what Carol and the BCPE have to do in terms of setting up an exam, that's way beyond our capabilities in terms of person power to be able to do that. This is based on the formation model. The formation model is built exactly on what the IEA criteria are. So basic ergonomic principles, human characteristics, work analysis and measurements, people and technology, and then also having some practical projects. This is just on the educational material. There's a connection here which will link people into, and this is on the website of the professional board, where you can find, anyone can go and find this material. We've also had two designations about in training, what is also being called an associate, although we call it in training. So this is a person who's completed the educational qualifications, but just needs to finish the professional practice, and we give them quite a bit of time to be able to do that, bearing in mind that they might not necessarily, a position might not necessarily be full-time ergonomics or human factors. And then the last slide that I would just like to just kind of go through is just some thoughts about actually going through the application process to apply to the committee which Marion is chairing, which Maggie used to chair beforehand. Oh, sorry, there's one more slide kind of before that. When we evaluate whether they meet the IEA core competencies, part of what we look at is just the 9 competencies which the IEA has put together. And what we do is we look for these competencies in the work samples which are given to us to evaluate. So when we're evaluating their work practices, essentially what we're doing is saying, can we find evidence? And we ask the person who is applying to actually identify that in a form, to say, listen, which part of the document are you saying meets each of these different competencies? 2 of these competencies we say are not required for a certified ergonomics associate. Those are the more higher level issues about recommendations and then implementing recommendations. So they are more diagnosticians, so they have to identify the problems, and develop a plan, but they don't necessarily need to do long-term interventions. The process of applying, some hints and tips. If you have a certification system and you're thinking about applying for endorsement by the IEA, make sure you read all of the IEA criteria documents for endorsement before you go and apply. And usually you'll need to have a lead time of about 6 months before that. I don't think you need any more than that. Just to make sure that you meet all of the criteria before going through and applying. So make a list of everything that you need to do. Make sure that you have all of your documents ready. I created a separate folder, just made it very clear Sometimes you'll see that each of the documents you need to might not necessarily be in separate documents. And what you would need to do then is just make sure you highlight it in your submission so that those portions can be easily found. And then make sure that you also get your support letters. My suggestion is start with your permission letters early, because very often these take the longest. When you have to rely on someone else to give you a permission letter, and it's not within your ambit to kind of give that permission letter. So start those early before you start putting all your records together. Also, if you have had a certification system for a number of years, make sure you have a really good set of records and that you're able to keep those together, because if you don't, it could take quite a long time to put them together. Luckily, the people who preceded me in this position as chairperson of the Professional Affairs Board did a really good job of keeping the materials well ordered and in nice separate files. So that made my job a lot easier. And then just before I close off, just the caveat from my side, and that is, while we've applied to the IEA to have our certification system recognized and accredited by the IEA, it's still under review. And so I can't yet say whether we did a good job, but I'm hoping what I found, it was actually a fairly simple process. It didn't take a long time it didn't take me a lot of work to put together. It was probably a couple of hours of just making sure I found the right documents, and then filling in the form probably took another 45 minutes to an hour. So it shouldn't be something that keeps you back from doing that, provided, of course, all those other things were in place. Maggie, I've hopefully caught up a little bit of time, and that might give us a couple of minutes to answer any further questions before you wrap up.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I suppose it's not very professional of me to wish you luck with your application, but as I'm not going to be personally involved in it, I will do that. I think that you have very well explained what's necessary. I remember years ago, I submitted the CRE application, and it took me only half a day or so to put the documents together. If you know your system well and you have got good record keeping, it's not a hard thing to do, but you must have those you must have those records accessible. You must have written rules. You must have a well documented and structured system. There's a couple of things that have come up in the chat that I'll quickly get to within the last 2 minutes of our presentation. Firstly, somebody asked whether we're going to make some presentations for schools. I presume they mean schools at university. I think most of the schools that are aware of the certification criteria in their area, and the courses are based fairly well on those. I don't know anywhere where that wouldn't be the case. So maybe I didn't understand the question correctly. There's a question from Eastern Europe, Bernard, with somebody asking for some assistance from CRE. Perhaps you could respond to that, please.
Yeah.
So in my final wrap up, I've lost it. Oh dear. Okay. Something had to go wrong with this. The first thing I want to tell you is that the IEA is planning on running regular webinars. They will mostly be with the scientific content. The next one is going to be on robotics. Keep an eye on the IEA website or Facebook, LinkedIn, where we will be advertising for that. It will take place in December. And I think many of us are interested in the theme of robotics and where HFE fits into that. So it should attract a lot of attention. There are more in the pipeline for next year, so watch this space. And thank you all very much for participating and for your interest in the topic. I hope if there are any questions that we haven't answered or that you think of later, please feel free to contact me at the IEA, and I will pass on your questions to the most appropriate person to respond to it. Thank you very much, and thank you very particularly to all the members of the panel for their willingness to participate, and particularly for those who had to get up in the middle of the night to do so. I wish you all a nice weekend. Goodbye.